Hello, good evening, and remain indoors. This is the quiz broadcast, coming to you every Friday, the same day as your food parcel. Chow down on a protein fudge, take whatever injections are recommended in your sector, and prepare to enjoy the show. Well, it's between 600 and 750 days since the event, but that hasn't stopped those of us that survive from enjoying ourselves. So let's remain indoors and say hello to our contestants.
So I just want to be clear for our audience, sir. You've got a governor of a state that is making executive orders, stay-at-home orders, that right now is cratering your economy. We don't know what data is being used, and yet you as a state senator, as a doctor, have not seen that data that's being used for our governor to make these decisions.
No, we have not. And
does that not concern you? I mean, shouldn't the people of Minnesota be screaming right now?
I've been filling out death certificates for over 30 years. When it comes to COVID-19, there is the additional data skewer that is, get this, there is no universal definition of COVID-19 death.
This concept was just drilled into us in medical school that whenever you're evaluating a new test, that you need to compare it to the gold standard. And that's how you know if it's actually valid. So with this COVID-19 test, there has not been any gold standard test that this has been compared to, because the supposed COVID-19 virus has never been purified and visualized.
But I think that people are starting to say, hold it now. We need to have a deeper understanding of this, and we're not getting it. As a physician, I received an email last week from the Department of Health coaching me on how to fill out death certificates. And I've never really received coaching from the Vital Statistics Agency in terms of how to do a death certificate. But basically, I felt like they were saying, you know, you don't have to have a confirmed laboratory test for COVID-19 in order to make the death certificate be COVID-19. So
Wait. Sir, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that and what you just said, I think, is critically important. Can you repeat what you just said, please?
Well, last Friday, I received a 7-page document that sort of told me that if I had an 86-year-old patient that had pneumonia but was never tested for COVID-19, but sometime after she came down with pneumonia, we learned that she had been exposed to her son, who had no symptoms, but later on was identified with COVID-19, that it would be appropriate to diagnose on the death certificate COVID-19. Now, we've not done that. If someone has the pneumonia after and it's in the middle of a flu epidemic, and I don't have a test on influenza, I don't diagnose influenza on the death certificate. I will say this elderly patient died of pneumonia.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but my heart is sinking right now as you're telling me this. You're a doctor. Why in the world would they be sending you out information to fill out death certificates, whether the person's been diagnosed with COVID-19 or not, but then to say in the death certificate this person's death was caused by COVID-19? That does not sound right to me.
I went to the person in our office who does most of the death certificates over the last 10, 20 years, and I said, does this sound right? I had her look at the documents that I printed off, and she said, well, we've always been told that you always put down just facts. You don't put down any probabilities. You don't put any presumptions down.
The Center for Disease Control, updated from yesterday, April 4th, still states that mortality, quote-unquote, data includes both confirmed and presumptive positive cases of COVID-19. That's from their website. Translation: the CDC counts both true COVID-19 cases and speculative guesses of COVID-19 the same. They call it death by COVID-19. They automatically overestimate the real death numbers by their own admission.
Head of the Department of Biostatistics, Epidemiology, and Research Design. And before that, I worked for 15 years with Klaus Dietz, one of the leading epidemiologists in the world. As with every respiratory disease, we should protect the elderly and fragile, because when they get pneumonia, they have a high risk of dying of the pneumonia. On the other hand, children do very well with these diseases. They're evolutionarily designed to be exposed to all sorts of viruses during their lifetime. And so they should keep going to school and infecting each other, then that contributes to herd immunity, which means after about 4 weeks, at the most, the elderly people could start joining their family, because then the virus would have been extinguished.
In fact, you think containment would prolong the duration of the virus?
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
With all respiratory diseases, the only thing that stops the disease is herd immunity. Well, what people are trying to do is to flatten the curve. I don't really know why. But what happens if you flatten the curve, you also to widen it, and it takes more time. And I don't see a good reason for a respiratory disease to stay in the population longer than necessary.
And what do you say to people who say we just didn't know about the lethality of this virus, and it was the smartest thing to do was just to basically do what we did and contain everybody because we just didn't have the data?
Oh, we had 2 other SARS viruses before. Coronaviruses. It's not the first coronavirus that comes out, and it won't be the last. And for all respiratory diseases, we have the same type of an epidemic. If you leave it alone, it comes for 2 weeks, it peaks, and it goes for 2 weeks, and it's gone.
This virus can kill people, and social upheaval can kill people. And what we want to do with public policy is gather the data to know who's at risk for all of the fallout, both the direct harms of infection and the indirect harms of economic collapse, of social upheaval. And we want to minimize the sum of the two. We're in the very early stages of realizing how grave the economic and societal toll of our response to the pandemic will be. It may feel good in the short term that you're unemployed and you can get a check, or you can get money from the government to help your small business survive for a little while. But the government can't just print money. That doesn't really work. We are going to wind up dealing with the consequences of that. And so,
this leads me to this. I mean, let's just get to brass tacks. Many people look around at the ways that big industries like pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and processed foods interact with the agencies that are meant to regulate them. And it seems to them that there's generally very little concern for the health and well-being of ordinary citizens. So I'm thinking of the opioid crisis, drugs like Vioxx,
right.
chemicals like PFOA, glyphosate. Because everyone's just amazed that suddenly they care about the elderly and the immune compromised, et cetera. Whereas, as you point out, their food, their water, their air is generally poisoning them all the time.
I absolutely share the concern that the overwhelming response to coronavirus begs the question, where the hell were we before? I'll give you just one obvious example because there are many. But we have had the disclosure in really high-profile places, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, that the American food supply is willfully engineered to be addictive. Essentially, teams of PhDs are hired by big food companies giving marching orders to design food people can't stop eating until their arm gets tired from lifting it to their mouths. They get functional MRI machines to achieve that goal. They get a bonus when they get food to the bliss point. And essentially what that means is we are watching corporate America subsidize epidemic obesity and diabetes to fatten corporate coffers. This is hiding in plain sight. And I have been wondering and asking for years, where is the outrage? And yet we pay no attention to it. So all of a sudden, there's this massive mobilization to protect health because of this acute threat, when there are chronic, relentless, inexorable threats occurring at a massive scale, hiding in plain sight. And is it because the right people profit? Is it because the timelines are extended? Is it some combination of those? We don't get outraged. We don't do anything about it. And we pay the price in lives lost year after year after year, and the scourge of poor diet affects children and adults alike. And because it kills hundreds of thousands prematurely in the US every year, but it kills us by virtue of chronic disease, it doesn't just do what the virus does, which is cause death. For many years before causing death, it causes chronic morbidity. It takes life from years and then takes years from lives. The virus doesn't do that.
For everybody that didn't hear it, I'm going to say it again. The Surgeon General, in a stunning turn of events, Surgeon General Jerome explained in an interview on Live XM Radio that the coronavirus task force has effectively dumped the Bill Gates Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization predictive contagion model and is now working with the real data. He explained on Sirius XM, Breitbart News host Alex Marlowe that given the new data, businesses will begin to reopen as early as May, others in June. As early as May, we're already open and we're going to continue to be open. This runs contrary to the out of fear mongering of Dr. Fauci and Bill Gates, who have made a media tour threatening the public that businesses may not reopen for 6 months to a year or unless governments purchase the conveniently patented big pharma vaccinations. According to Adams, what the American people need to know is we actually have data, and so we're tracking that data. And in consultation with the findings of Dr. Adams, the task force was working with predictive models which have been created by the Bill Gates-dominated World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control. Dr. Fauci's control over the CDC has been criticized in the past for its for-profit motive in the handling of ranges of illnesses from HIV to H1N1. This is the biggest news. The Gates CDC Fauci model has just been dropped on its head and cracked open like a rotten egg.
Stock up on basic supplies. A sensible shopping basket would include sand, tin tomatoes, and 600 toilet rolls. Get your supplies early, as smaller shops may run out of sand. There will now be a deadly outbreak of the air. Breathe in as hard as you can, and then hold it. You can breathe out when you hear the other all clear, which should happen within 2 to 3 working days.
And don't forget, let your children die first. Knowledge and skills from the old world will be much prized. Children are ignorant and of little use.
Remember, adults are the future, if there is one.
It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. You've got to say, I'm a human being. My life has value.
In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful.